Namaste learners. Today we are going to discuss the unit, the concept of Chitta Vritti in yoga philosophy. This unit has been divided into two parts, and today we are going to discuss part 1. In this part we are going to discuss the meaning of yoga. What do we mean by yoga? After that, we will discuss on yoga philosophy. Okay? We will have a brief description on yoga philosophy. After that, we will know the relation of yoga philosophy with Sankhya philosophy. After that, we are going to understand the concept of Chitta Vritti in yoga philosophy. So, let us start by the meaning of yoga. What do we mean by yoga? So, first of all, yoga philosophy is one of the Astika or Vedic school of Indian philosophy. As already told, you all know that Astika means those who believe in the authoritativeness of the Vedas are Astikas, and those schools who do not believe in the authoritativeness of the Vedas are the Nastika schools. Okay? And yoga philosophy is one of the Astika or Vedic school of Indian philosophy. Now, literally, the word yoga means union. Union of what? That is spiritual union. Okay? It doesn't mean a normal or a ordinary union. It is a spiritual union of the individual soul with the universal soul. Okay? So the literal meaning of the word yoga means union of the individual soul with the universal soul. And this is not an ordinary union. It is the spiritual union of these two souls, that is the individual soul with the universal soul. Again, the Gita defines yoga as that state where there is nothing higher or what realizing than it, and the state free from all pain and misery. So the definition of yoga by the Gita is that yoga is something upon which nothing is higher. Okay? And once you realize yoga, then that state in your life is that state where you are free from all pain and misery. Okay? After that, according to Patanjali, now who is Patanjali? Patanjali is the founder of yoga philosophy. So according to Patanjali, who is the founder of yoga philosophy, yoga does not mean union, but spiritual effort to attain perfection through the control of the body, senses and the mind. Okay, so according to Patanjali, yoga does not mean union, but it is our own spiritual effort to attain perfection by controlling our senses, by having control upon our body and the mind. Okay? Now we come to a brief description on yoga philosophy. As already stated, the yoga philosophy was founded by Patanjali, and it is very important. In my earlier videos also, I told you all that it is very important to know the founders of the schools. Yes? So, the founders of the schools along with the main text of that school is very important. So, the yoga philosophy was founded by Patanjali, and Patanjali's Yoga Sutra is the first work of yoga system. Okay? So, the main text of yoga philosophy is Yoga Sutra, and it was founded by, and it was the first work of yoga system, and it was written by Patanjali. Okay? Now this Yoga Sutra, it is divided into 4 parts. Now, what these 4 parts of Yoga Sutra consist? The first part is called Samadhi Para. The first part of the Yoga Sutra is called Samadhi Para, which deals with the nature and the aim of concentration. Concentration means Samadhi only. Yes? So, the first part of Yoga Sutra is called Samadhi Para, which deals with the nature and the aim of concentration. The second part of Yoga Sutra is called Sadhana Para, and this part of Yoga Sutra explains the means to realize the end. Okay? The second part of Yoga Sutra, which is called Sadhana Para, it explains the means to realize the end. The third part of Yoga Sutra is called Vibhuti Para. The third part of Yoga Sutra is called Vibhuti Para, which deals with the supranormal powers that can be acquired through yoga. Okay? So this third part of Yoga Sutra deals with the supranormal powers that can be acquired through yoga. And this part is called Vibhuti Para. The last part, that is the fourth part of Yoga Sutra, is called Kaivalya Para. And this part of Yoga Sutra describes the nature of liberation and the reality of the transcendental self. Okay? So the fourth and the last part of the Yoga Sutra, which is called Kaivalya Para, describes the nature of liberation and the reality of the transcendental self. The most important and authoritative work of yoga system is Vyasa's commentary on the Yoga Sutra, which is known as Yoga Bhashya. So Vyasa, he had given his commentary on the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali. Okay, and Vyasa's commentary on the Yoga Sutra is known as Yoga Bhashya, and it is one of the most important and authoritative work of yoga system. As a school of Indian philosophy, the yoga system believes that liberation is to be attained through the direct knowledge of the self's distinction from the physical world, including our body, mind, and the ego. So, according to the yoga system, okay, as a school of Indian philosophy, they believe that to attain liberation, we should know ourselves directly. We should have a direct knowledge of ourselves. Okay? And this knowledge, when we are attaining this knowledge, then we have to keep distinct ourselves from the physical world, including our body, mind, and the ego. When we can separate the self from this physical world, our mind, body, and ego, then only we can have direct knowledge of the self and can attain liberation. Yoga also lays down a practical path of self-realization for the religious aspirant. Yoga also emphasizes the importance of the practical methods of purification and concentration for realizing the self's distinction from the body and the mind, and thereby attaining liberation. So as already told, to attain liberation, we need to distinct ourselves from our mind, body, and ego. And to have the direct knowledge of the self, yoga also emphasizes certain practical methods of purification and concentration, so that we can realize how the self is distinct from the body, mind, and our ego. Okay, we can realize the self distinctively or separately from the mind and body, and thereby can attain liberation. Now let us discuss how Samkhya and Yoga philosophy are related. What is the relation between Yoga philosophy and Samkhya philosophy? The Yoga philosophy is closely related to Sankhya philosophy. How? It is in this sense that Yoga is the application of the theory of the Sankhya in practical life. So, the theories of Sankhya philosophy, the application of the theories of Sankhya philosophy in our practical life is given by the Yoga philosophy, and in this way both are related to each other. Yoga accepts the Sankhya's epistemology and admits the three pramanas of perception, inference and testimony. So like Sankhya, Yoga also accepts the three pramanas of perception, inference and testimony, and Yoga also accepts the epistemology of the Sankhya philosophy. Yoga also accepts the metaphysics of Sankhya with its 25 principles. Okay, so Yoga accepts Sankhya's epistemology also and metaphysics also. But unlike Sankhya, Yoga believes in God as the supreme self distinct from other selves. So as we know that Sankhya, though it is one of the Astika school of Indian philosophy and it believes in the authoritativeness of the Vedas, it does not believe in the existence of God as it cannot be proved. But the Yoga philosophy, it believes in the existence of God. It believes God as the supreme self, distinct from other selves. So in this case only, Sankhya and Yoga differs. Okay, Sankhya do not believe in God, but Yoga philosophy, it believes in God. Like Sankhya, Yoga philosophy also advocates the theory of Satkaryavada or Parinamavada, according to which there is neither production of non-existent thing nor destruction. So in this case also, Yoga and Sankhya are similar, that both the schools, they advocate Satkaryavada. And what was the theory of Satkaryavada? That the effect pre-exists in the cause. It is neither produced nor it is destroyed, isn't it? So the effect is already in the cause only. So like the Sankhya, Yoga philosophy also advocates the theory of Satkaryavada or Parinamavada. So we can see that Yoga and Sankhya, they accepts the Yoga accepts the epistemology and metaphysics of Sankhya philosophy, and also it accepts the theory of causation of Sankhya philosophy, because Satkaryavada is the theory of causation. So Yoga philosophy accepts Sankhya's epistemology, metaphysics and the theory of causation. Only in one case they differs, that is Sankhya do not believe in the existence of God, but the Yoga philosophy, it believes in God as the supreme self distinct from other selves. Now let us come to the concept of Chitta Vritti. Now what is Chitta Vritti? Chitta means the three internal organs, namely Buddhi or intellect, Ahankara or ego, and Manas or mind. So Chitta means the three internal organs, that is the Buddhi or the intellect, Ahankara or ego, and Manas or the mind. Okay? And Chitta is the first product of Prakriti and is subject to the three gunas. We all know that the three gunas are related to Prakriti, isn't it? So as Chitta is the first product of Prakriti, okay, it is subjected to the three gunas. Chitta is essentially unconscious, though it becomes conscious by the reflection of the self. So as Chitta is the product of Prakriti, and Prakriti we know it is unconscious. So Chitta is unconscious. But when it comes by the reflection of the self, okay, it becomes conscious. So citta is essentially unconscious, but it becomes conscious by the reflection of the self. And the self here means the Purusha. Okay? The consciousness of Purusha in it leads to the impression that it is the experiencer. So when the citta becomes conscious by the reflection of the Purusha, okay, it leads to the impression that it is the experiencer, that it experiences things, pain, pleasure, all these things. Okay? But essentially it is unconscious, as it is the product of Prakriti. But when it comes in contact or reflection of the self, that is Purusha, it thinks that it is experiencing something. The consciousness of Purusha in it leads to the impression that it is the experiencer. As cause, citta is all pervading like Akasha, and we have as many cittas as there are Purushas, since each Purusha has a citta connected with it. We all know that there are many Purushas, isn't it? Many selves, plurality of Purushas. You all have done in the unit of Sankhya philosophy. So, as there are many Purushas, there are many cittas, since each Purusha has a citta connected with it. Citta, when gets related to any objects, it assumes the form of the object, and this form is called vritti or modification. So citta, when it gets related to any object, it assumes the form of that object, and that form is called vritti or modification. Citta is the physical medium for the manifestation of the spirit. Just as in a red hot ball iron, formless fire appears spherical and cold iron appears hot. Similarly, on account of its reflection in the citta, Purusha appears changing and citta appears conscious. Okay? So it is just a appearance. Okay? Just as in a red hot iron bulb, we find that the fire is in spherical form, isn't it? The fire is formless, but we find it in a spherical form in a red hot iron ball. Similarly, on account of its reflection in the citta, that is Purusha's reflection in the citta, this Purusha appears changing and citta appears conscious, and this is just an appearance. But when the Purusha realizes that it is completely isolated and is only a passive spectator beyond the play of Prakriti, it ceases to identify itself with its reflection in the citta. Okay? So when this Purusha realizes that it is completely isolated and is only a passive spectator, okay, beyond the play of Prakriti, it ceases to identify itself with its reflection in the citta. And as a result, the light is withdrawn and the modification of the citta fall to the ground. This cessation of the modification of the citta through meditation is called yoga. It is the return of the Purusha to its original perfection. Okay? Now, the modification of the citta are of 5 kinds, in which all cognitive mental states and processes may be included. The first is right cognition. The second, wrong cognition. Third, verbal cognition or imagination. Fourth, sleep. And fifth is memory. So the modification of the citta are of 5 kinds, and in this all cognitive mental states and processes are included. Now let us discuss these 5 kinds. First one is right cognition. Right cognition is also called prama, and right cognition or prama is of 3 kinds. One is perception, second is inference, and third is verbal testimony or sabda. So when the citta through the sense comes into contact with the external objects and assumes its form or comes into contact with the internal mental state, then it is called perception. Then when the citta cognizes the generic nature of things, then it is called inference. Okay? And third one is the verbal testimony or shabda. The second kind of modification of the citta is wrong cognition or viparyaya. So it is the wrong knowledge of objects as what they really are not, and it includes doubt. Okay, for example, the wrong knowledge like that of a rope and a snake. Okay, when we think a rope to be a snake. So this is wrong cognition, that is viparyaya. Okay, when we mistake a rope to be a snake. So it is the wrong knowledge of objects as what they really are not, and it includes doubt. Okay, it is the wrong knowledge of objects as what they really are not, and it includes doubt. The third kind is verbal cognition or imagination, which is also known as vikalpa. Okay, and it is the mere verbal idea caused by words to which no real facts corresponds, like that of a hare's horn. Okay, so it is just imagination, vikalpa. It is mere verbal idea caused by words and no real fact is associated or correspond to it, like that of a hare's horn. The fourth kind is sleep or nidra. This mental modification is due to the predominance of tamas in citta and the consequent cessation of waking consciousness and dream experience. Okay, this is the fourth kind. And this sleep or nidra as a mental modification is due to the predominance of tamas in citta. Okay, and the fourth kind of mental modification is memory or smriti. It is the recollection of past experience through the impressions left behind. Okay, what is smriti or memory? It is the, what type of mental modification is this? It is the recollection of past experience through the impressions left behind. When the citta is modified into any kind of vritti, okay, the self or purusha is reflected in it, and the purusha, it appears to pass through different states of the mind and stages of life. The purusha considers itself to be the subject to birth, growth, decay and death, and believes that it sleeps and wakes up, imagines and remembers. Okay, so when the citta is modified into any kind of vritti, the self or the purusha, it is reflected. Okay, in this way it appears that the purusha is passing through different states of the mind and stages of life. The purusha considers itself to be the subject to birth and growth, decay and death, and believes that it sleeps and wakes up, imagines and remembers. But in reality, the self or the purusha is above all the happenings of the body and the mind. It is only the citta that really performs these functions of sleeping and waking, imagining and remembering. The purusha is not that. Okay, in reality the self or the purusha, it is above all the happenings of the body. It is not related only because of the citta. It is actually the citta who is going through these mental modifications of sleeping, waking, imagining. Okay, but the purusha actually, it is not related with all this. It is above all the happenings of the body. Okay, but as we had discussed that due to the reflection of the self in the citta becomes an experiencer, and purusha also is reflected in the citta. Okay, now purusha, as it is reflected in the citta, which is held up before it as a mirror before a person, appears to be the subject of the 5 kinds of sufferings or kleshas. Okay, so actually purusha is not related, but as it is reflected in the citta, it is thought that it goes through these 5 kinds of suffering. Okay, and these 5 kinds are ignorance or wrong knowledge of the non-eternal as eternal. Okay, that means thinking of the non-eternal as eternal. It is ignorance or wrong knowledge. Asmita or egoism, that is the false notion or perception of the self as identical with buddhi or the mind. Okay, so asmita or egoism is that kind of suffering in which we think that our perception of the self as identical with our buddhi or the mind. We perceive the self as identical with the buddhi or the mind. Okay, and this kind of suffering is called asmita or egoism. The third kind of suffering is raga or attachment, that is the desire for pleasure and the means of its attainment. So attachment, this is another kind of suffering, and in this suffering we desire for pleasure and the means of its attainment, and if we can't attain it, then we get pain, we get suffering, isn't it? So as much as we have desire for pleasure, and if we do not get those pleasures, okay, then what we have sufferings, isn't it? So this attachment or raga is another kind of suffering. The fourth is dvesa or aversion to pain and causes thereof. Okay, dvesa or aversion to pain and causes, etc. All this. Okay, this is the fourth kind of suffering. The fifth kind of suffering is avini-vesha or clinging to life and instinctive fear for death in all creatures. Okay, the thinking of death, afraiding of death, frightening of death. We all know that we will die someday, but if we go on thinking that we are going to die, and I am very much afraid of it, this is also another kind of suffering, and this is called avini-vesha or clinging to life and instinctive fear for death in all creature. Belonging to live and afraid of death. Okay, this is also another kind of suffering. So these are the 5 kinds of sufferings or kleshas which the Purusha thinks that it is subject to, as it is reflected in the Citta. Okay, and these 5 kinds are ignorance or wrong knowledge, asmita or egoism, raga or attachment, dvesa or aversion, and avini-vesha or clinging to life and instinctive fear for death. Now the bondage of the self is due to its wrong identification with the mental modification. Okay, therefore liberation means the end of this wrong identification through proper discrimination between Purusha and Prakriti. So once we can discriminate between Purusha and Prakriti, then only we can attain liberation. Okay, and to attain liberation, human beings should restrain the activity of the body, the senses and the mind. They should suppress all the modifications of the citta. Okay, also yoga here is considered as the cessation of mental functions or modification. Okay, yoga is the way of cessation of mental functions or its modification. When we do yoga, okay, then only you can suppress all the modifications of the citta. So the aim of yoga is to prevent the self from identifying itself with mental modifications. Okay, so the main aim of yoga is to prevent the self, okay, from identifying itself with mental modifications. And if the self identifies itself with the mental modifications, then we will have these 5 kinds of sufferings. Okay, so here the first part of this unit ends. So in this part we discussed about the meaning of yoga, the different meanings of yoga, okay, the literal meaning of yoga, the definition of yoga given by Gita, then also the definition of yoga given by the founder of yoga philosophy, that is Patanjali. The founder of yoga philosophy is Patanjali, and the Patanjali's work is called Yoga Sutra. Okay, and it is the first work of yoga system. And this Yoga Sutra has been divided into 4 parts: Samadhipara, Sadhanapara, Vibhutipara and Kaivalyapara. Okay, after that we studied that the most important and authoritative work of yoga system was Vyasa's commentary on the Yoga Sutra, which is called Yoga Bhashya. Okay, and also how, according to yoga system as a school of Indian philosophy, how we can attain liberation. Okay, how yoga lays down its path for self-realization. Okay. After that, we discussed about the relation of yoga philosophy with the Samkhya philosophy. We came to know that yoga is the application of the theory of the Sankhya in practical life. Okay. And yoga accepts the epistemology, metaphysics and the theory of causation of Sankhya philosophy. But unlike Sankhya, yoga believes in the existence of God. After that, we discussed the concept of Chitta Vritti. What do we mean by Chitta? Chitta means Buddhi or intellect, Ahankara or yoga, and Manas or mind. And Vritti is that when Chitta gets related to any objects, it assumes the form of that object. And that form of that object is called Vritti or modification. When the Chitta gets related to any object, it assumes the form of that object, and that form is called Vritti. Okay. We discussed about the various kinds of mental modification. Okay, the modification of the Chitta, which are of 5 kinds, that is right cognition, wrong cognition, verbal cognition or imagination, sleep and memory. After that, we also discussed about the 5 different kinds of sufferings or kleshas. Okay, which the Purusha, as it is reflected in the Chitta, Purusha appears to be the subject of. Okay. The Purusha thinks itself to be the subject of these 5 kinds of suffering as it is reflected in the Chitta. Thank you.